Well, Child Protection Week is an annual campaign to raise awareness of the rights of children in accordance to the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and Children's Act. According to the latest crime stats, there was a 20% decline in child murders, but a 29% rise in attempted murders compared against the same three-month period last year. Is enough being done to protect children in South Africa? That is the question we are asking, and we will be posing this question now to the person that we are going to be interviewing. Of course, he is Luke Lamprecht, and he is the director there of Women and Men Against Child Abuse, the head of Advocacy Group. Luke, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I mean, those two harrowing clips that we've played now, I mean, one just has a loss for words. I mean, we are meant to be marking Child Protection Week, probably talking about, the advances that have been made in this country to protect children. But we are still sitting with statistics that are unacceptable. I mean, we've just heard in that previous clip that 1 in 6, one child is raped every 60 minutes in this country. We just heard of a father chained his 8-year-old son and was sexually molesting him. Is enough being done in this country to protect children?
Thanks very much for your time. The first point to make is one around Child Protection Week. And, you have highlighted these cases and they are horrific. But these happen 365 days a year. So the lens that we put on it at the moment is these things are occurring, but what the public must understand is that these are happening in the work we do across the entire year. The second point is that around the murder statistics, the murder stats are quite complicated because we have a range of problems around children being discarded after late-term terminations of pregnancy, and we don't even know if those children had ever lived. So in other words, whether they had been murdered or whether it's what we call a concealment of birth. So I'm not entirely sure that the murder stats are correct. A positive thing is the increase in the reports of attempted murder, because those are cases where there is something in progress. In other words, children are being assaulted to the point where they may die. And the positive is that if there's an increase in that, what that means is there is faith in the system that we can report things and something will happen. So it doesn't mean there's an increase in the amount of assaults on children. It simply means there's an increase in the amount of reports, because we have no idea how many children are actually being abused. And then the last point is the one you've asked, are we doing enough? Well, definitely not. Because one child being killed by somebody that they are in the care of, or one child being chained up by their parent, is one too many. So we've got to be careful we don't fall into this trap of kind of saying that because we have 50,000 instead of 55,000, that we are doing better. The goal really is that we treat children with the respect and the dignity that they deserve, and we do that without any question as adults. So the whole of society is responsible for the protection of children. Firstly, the negative duty is to not harm them, and secondly, we need to actively protect them.
And then, of course, there is a troubling story emanating from the Western Cape. We're hearing that, the very NGOs that are supposed to protect these children when they have been harmed, in the comfort of their own homes, are facing closure. We understand, of course, that they are facing financial strains. This is a picture only in one province, but I would imagine that there are many provinces that face the same thing. What can be done in that sector to ensure that at least, that when children are taken out of those homes that they are harmed in, they can then rely on a system that is meant to protect them?
So South Africa is a unique place because generally the protection of children is it's kind of the domain of the state. So if you look at many other places in the world, there are not non-profit organizations doing what we call statutory work, so in other words, the work of the law. So NGOs provide support and counseling and therapy, and they do many things, but they don't actually get involved in the day-to-day kind of the as an organ of state. So in other words, prosecuting people, removing children, placing them in care, etc. And what has happened as a result, and that's sort of a legacy of our past, is that we have the situation where the NGOs have traditionally provided services that were subsidized by the state, and the state is saying that they want to provide those services. And now we're at a bit of a stalemate because the state is not providing the services and the NGOs are not in a position to provide the services based on the fact that the subsidies are being decreased or withdrawn because there's a change in the child protection philosophy. And we need to treat that with a great deal of concern, because if it is going to be that the state is going to render services, we need to know and finance that, because that's also underfinanced. And if it is that the NGOs are going to provide services, we need to know and finance that. It's almost like we're in a bit of a no man's land at the moment, where there is not really a clear direction of what is happening. And the worry that we have is that there are very important concepts like family preservation, family reunification, the most empowering, least restrictive options where we don't want the state to intrude on people's lives. But that can't be the entire picture, because the social fabric is so fragile that children and families are falling through it all the time. So we need to take a long, hard look at the systemic issues here, not just individual cases.
When we look at, just one area that has been a contentious issue for many years, particularly for, GBV activists, is the sexual offences registry. Why is it so difficult to open this up, for society to take a look at, like we're seeing in other countries? Of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed into law the criminal law, the sexual offences and related matters, the Chapter 6 of the amendment bill, that expands the scope of that register, but it doesn't allow, a mother, for instance, who has children and is dating somebody new, for her to be able to check, his status, or, it's so onerous that it becomes very difficult. I mean, it does somehow create a leeway for schools and some employers in some cases to do that. Would something like this, help at least, parents who seek to protect their children, if it were opened up and, and was not as onerous as it is now?
Well, there's two sides to that. So the first side is that I don't think that parents need to in any way believe or think, and this is worldwide, that they can defer their relationship and their responsibility and their connection with their children for some kind of state organ like a register. So firstly, parents must understand that people slip through registers all over the world. The second part is a very valid point. And, for example, I would say, I'm a man, I've got children, and I employ a music teacher to teach my children music, and he's self-employed. So he's someone who runs like a bank account that I pay into, and I employ him to teach my child. Now, I'm not entitled to access to the register, but in terms of the law, the person who employs you is entitled to check you against both the child protection and sexual offenders register. And parents aren't insisting on that. And that's part of the problem, is that parents go in relatively blindly and say, oh, this looks like a wonderful person, and they're going to do very nice things, and they're a wonderful coach or music teacher or dramatist, whatever they are. And the parents sort of forego their due diligence because they think that because this person is in this position, they must have earned it. And in order for adults to groom children, they first have to groom the parents of the children, then the institution. So when you look at the register specifically, the register is one that if we can access it, would give us a basic level of surety that this person has not been found guilty of some kind of an offense against a child or a person with a disability or a vulnerable person. And in addition, it creates another level of protection where we are saying, I'm going to check you. I know that people who choose to work with children, sometimes we call them career offenders, sometimes choose to work with children because they want access to children, and as a result, I will do my due diligence. Now, all of that is important, but the most important thing is that parents pay attention to the people who are around their children. And one very simplistic message to all parents is that if someone is paying more attention to your child than you have a problem. So you must understand that the registers are a social stopgap. Your relationship with your child is primary, and secondarily, you need to make sure that the people that you put your children in the care of, that you have a good feel of where they have come from, in terms of registers, qualifications, references, etc. So it's, you're talking about employing somebody in a job to teach or look after your children. It's the most important job in the world. Think about how you would treat other people who are applying for jobs.
Look, as we wrap up our conversation, there's one area that you just mentioned now that we didn't touch on, but very quickly, how prevalent, is child abuse, for children who are living with disabilities? I mean, of course, the spectrum is wide. I'm particularly concerned about, for instance, children who are hard of hearing and those that are blind. I mean, how is this sector catered for?
Well, you can multiply their risk by 3. Because children with disabilities are 3 times more vulnerable than everybody else. And in addition to them being more vulnerable, the systems that are meant to assist them, for example, courts, cannot accommodate them. Because if you are hearing impaired and you sign, how do you give evidence? How do you write statements? So the entire system is weighted against children with disabilities, and it is a very, very serious concern because, number one, they're vulnerable, number two, they don't have access to the system, and number 3, the system doesn't represent them. So they are multiply disadvantaged and multiply vulnerable.
All right, Luke, thank you so much for your time and your analysis. Really do appreciate it. Luke Lamprecht there, Women and Men Against Child Abuse, Head of Advocacy.